blood on the steering wheel, a shattered phone. When the ruthless head of the Chicago syndicate found his wife's abandoned car, he thought she was dead. 7 months later, a single medical record changed everything. He didn't just find his runaway wife, he found her carrying his heir. The wind coming off Lake Michigan in mid-November felt like shattered glass against the skin. Dominic Rossi stood at the edge of Navy Pier, the collar of his charcoal wool overcoat turned up against the biting chill. He didn't feel the cold. The man who controlled the most feared criminal syndicate in the Midwest was entirely numb, his dark, hollow eyes fixed on the twisted metal of a black Mercedes G-Wagon. It was her car, Emma's car. Yellow police tape whipped furiously in the wind, but the corrupt precinct captain on Dominic's payroll had already cleared the perimeter. There were no flashing sirens, no reporters, just Dominic, the churning gray water of the lake, and the metallic stench of blood. Boss. A voice cut through the howling wind. It was Matteo, Dominic's underboss, and a man who had bled for the Rossi family for 2 decades. Matteo's face was grim, his breath pluming in the freezing air. The boys swept the area. She's not here, but there's a lot of blood on the driver's side, and we found this. Matteo held out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a diamond wedding band, custom cut, flawless, worth more than most men made in a lifetime. Dominic's jaw locked. He snatched the bag, the sharp edges of the plastic, digging into his leather gloves. He had slipped that ring onto Emma's finger just 2 years ago in a private cathedral in Rome, swearing an oath that was supposed to bind them for eternity. Tell me what happened. Dominic demanded, his voice, a low, terrifying rumble that promised violence. We pulled the traffic cams, Matteo replied, stepping closer, lowering his voice, as if the wind itself might betray them. She didn't crash, Dominic. She was run off the road. But there's more. We intercepted a wire transfer an hour before she disappeared. $2 million moved from her private offshore account into a shell corporation. Dominic turned his eyes, narrowing into lethal slits. Who? Matteo hesitated, feigning reluctance. The Falcone family. Dominic, she's been passing them our shipping schedules for months. And the blood. Our inside guy at the lab fast-tracked the sample. It's animal blood. Pig's blood. She faked it. The world seemed to stop spinning. Emma, his quiet, brilliant Emma. She was an art restorer, a civilian he had dragged into his dark world because he had been too obsessed to let her go. She spent her days covered in turpentine and gold leaf, restoring Renaissance canvases in her West Loop studio. The thought of her conspiring with the Falcone syndicate, the very men who had murdered Dominic's father, was absurd. But then, Matteo handed him a thick manila folder. Inside were photographs. Emma sitting at a corner table at a discreet cafe in River North, leaning across the table to touch the hand of Lorenzo Falcone. Emma at O'Hare Airport, slipping a thumb drive to one of Lorenzo's lieutenants. Dominic's vision blurred with a red, suffocating rage. The evidence was irrefutable. She hadn't just betrayed the syndicate. She had betrayed his bed, his trust, his soul. She had played him for a fool, faked her own death, and run off with his worst enemy. Find her, Dominic whispered the words, scraping against his throat like sandpaper. He turned his back on the lake, his heart calcifying into solid stone. I don't care if you have to burn this country to the ground. Find her. And when you do bring her to me, I'll handle my wife myself. For 7 months, Dominic Rossi became a ghost of wrath. The Chicago underworld bled. He dismantled the Falcone family piece by piece, executing Lorenzo in the basement of an abandoned meatpacking plant on Halsted Street. But Lorenzo had died, laughing, swearing he had never touched Emma, claiming Dominic was a paranoid fool. Dominic didn't believe him. He drowned his grief in Scotch violence and a relentless, exhausting hunt. Emma had vanished. It was as if she had stepped off the edge of the earth. He stopped sleeping. The penthouse they had shared became a mausoleum. He left her studio exactly as it was her half-finished paintings, the lingering scent of her vanilla and cedarwood perfume. He hated her with a ferocity that terrified his own men, but beneath the hatred was a festering, unhealed wound. He just wanted to look into her eyes, one last time, and ask her why. July in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, was suffocatingly humid. The small, picturesque town nestled in the Ozark Mountains was a haven for artists, eccentrics, and people who wanted to be forgotten. Emma Hayes, now living as Sarah Bennett, wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead as she flipped a row of sizzling burgers on the flat-top grill of Patsy's Diner. "Hey, Sarah, order up for table 4, called Betty, the diner's elderly owner, sliding a ticket across the metal counter. "Got it, Betty," Emma replied softly, her voice carrying a slight rasp. She reached for a spatula, but a sudden sharp kick against her ribs made her gasp. She dropped the utensil, her hands instinctively flying to her swollen belly. She was 7 months pregnant. Emma leaned against the cool, stainless steel of the prep counter, closing her eyes as she took a deep, shaky breath. The baby was restless today. Dominic's baby. Just the thought of his name sent a phantom ache through her chest, a mixture of profound longing and sheer terror. She hadn't run away with a lover. She hadn't sold his secrets to the Falcones. The truth was a nightmare she relived every time she closed her eyes. 7 months ago, Emma had discovered she was pregnant. Overjoyed, she had left her art studio early to surprise Dominic at his downtown office. But when she arrived, she overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. Matteo, Dominic's trusted underboss, was speaking with a cartel liaison, orchestrating a massive weapons shipment that would bypass the Rossi family's ledgers entirely. Matteo was skimming millions, plotting a coup to overthrow Dominic. Before Emma could slip away, Matteo had caught her. The look in his eyes wasn't the loyal soldier Dominic believed him to be. It was the look of a rabid dog. "Dominic won't believe you," Matteo had whispered, cornering her in the hallway. "I've already planted the seeds. I've doctored photos. I've set up bank accounts in your name. If you tell him, I'll convince him you're lying to save your own skin. And then, Emma, I'll kill you. I'll kill you, and I'll carve that little Rossi bastard right out of your stomach." Matteo's men had chased her that night. They had run her G-Wagon off the road near Navy Pier. She had barely escaped the wreck, slicing her own arm on the shattered glass to leave enough blood to make it look like a fatal injury. She threw her ring onto the floorboard, climbed up the embankment in the freezing rain, and vanished into the city's underground transit system. She knew Dominic's temper. She knew his blind spot for Matteo, the man who had saved Dominic's life in a shootout 10 years prior. If she stayed, Matteo would murder her, and the baby and Dominic might never know the truth until it was too late. So she ran. She ran to protect the only piece of Dominic she had left. Emma finished her shift, her lower back, screaming in agony as she untied her stained apron. She collected her meager tips, $42 in crumpled bills, and stepped out into the muggy evening air. The cicadas were buzzing loudly in the dense trees. She needed to stop at the local clinic. Her iron levels had been dangerously low, a complication from the stress, and her rare O-negative blood type. The small-town doctor, a kind man named Dr. Harris, had insisted on regular blood draws. Emma walked into the quiet clinic, nodding to the receptionist. "Just here for the follow-up, Nancy. Go right on back, Sarah." Nancy smiled. As Emma sat in the vinyl chair and offered her arm, Dr. Harris sighed. "Your iron is dipping again, Sarah. I'm prescribing a specific intravenous iron complex, but the pharmacy here doesn't stock it. I have to order it through the National Registry. It requires your exact medical profile and blood type to ensure there's no allergic reaction. I'll input it now." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Is that database private?" "Absolutely. HIPAA protected. Only goes to the Central Medical Supply Network in Chicago," Dr. Harris assured her, tapping away at his keyboard. Chicago. A chill ran down Emma's spine, despite the 90-degree heat. But she pushed the paranoia away. She was hundreds of miles away. She was a ghost. She didn't know that Dominic Rossi owned the servers that routed that central medical database. She didn't know that his cybersecurity chief had set up an automated algorithm to flag any medical entry matching Emma's highly specific biometric profile. An O-negative blood type, with a rare Kell antigen coupled with her exact date of birth, which she had accidentally provided on her initial intake forms months ago. At 8:45 p.m. in Chicago, A silent alarm flashed red across a monitor in the Rossi Syndicate's underground surveillance hub. 10 minutes later, the door to Dominic's penthouse office burst open. The cyber chief, a pale kid named Leo, stood trembling, holding a tablet. "Boss," Leo stammered, swallowing hard as Dominic looked up from his glass of scotch, his eyes dead and cold. "We got a hit. The algorithm, it found her." Dominic froze. The crystal glass in his hand remained perfectly still. "Where?" "A free clinic. Eureka Springs, Arkansas, under the name Sarah Bennett." "Sir, she's alive." Leo hesitated, looking at the tablet again. "But there's a flag on the medical order." "Speak," Dominic growled, standing up his massive frame, casting a terrifying shadow across the room. "The medication ordered for her," Leo whispered, his eyes wide. "It's a prenatal iron infusion. Boss, she's heavily pregnant." The glass shattered in Dominic's grip, amber liquid and blood spilling across his mahogany desk. "Pregnant?" The word echoed in his mind like a gunshot. The timeline. If she was pregnant, the child was conceived before she disappeared, before the supposed betrayal. "Get my plane ready," Dominic commanded, his voice eerily calm, a terrifying contrast to the storm brewing in his dark eyes. He grabbed his custom 1911 pistol from the desk drawer and slid it into his shoulder holster. "Tell no one, not even Mateo. I am going to Arkansas." 24 hours later, heavy rain was pouring down on the sloped streets of Eureka Springs. Emma was walking home from the diner, holding a cheap yellow umbrella over her head. The streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the wet pavement. Her apartment was just down a narrow alleyway, behind a row of antique shops. As she turned the corner into the alley, she stopped. A black Lincoln Navigator sat idling in the shadows, its headlights off. The rain drummed relentlessly against her umbrella. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her heavy body wouldn't move. The driver's side door opened. A tall, broad-shouldered silhouette stepped out into the pouring rain. He didn't wear a coat. The rain instantly soaked his black dress shirt, molding it to his muscular chest. Emma dropped her umbrella. It clattered against the cobblestones. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sharp, ruthless jawline and the piercing, furious, dark eyes of Dominic Rossi. He looked older, harsher, but the raw magnetic power radiating from him stole the air right out of her lungs. He closed the distance between them in slow, predatory strides, his eyes dropping from her pale, terrified face down to the massive swell of her stomach, hidden beneath her oversized maternity shirt. He stopped inches from her, his massive chest rising and falling heavily. The smell of rainscotch and his expensive cologne surrounded her, dizzying her. Emma began to tremble, backing up until her shoulders hit the cold brick wall of the alley. "Dominic, please!" She choked out tears, instantly mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "Let me explain. Please don't hurt the baby." Dominic slammed his hands against the brick wall on either side of her head, trapping her. He leaned in his face mere inches from hers. The pure, unadulterated obsession in his eyes was terrifying. He reached up his large, calloused hand, gently tracing the curve of her jaw, his thumb brushing over her trembling lips. "Hurt you," Dominic whispered, his voice, dark, possessive, and vibrating with a terrifying emotional intensity that sent a violent shiver down her spine. He dropped his gaze to her stomach, his hand moving down to rest possessively over the child kicking inside her. "You stole my heart, faked your death, and tried to hide my heir in the mud, Emma. But I found you." He leaned closer, his lips brushing against her ear, his breath hot against her freezing skin. "And I'll never let you go." The heavy door of the black Lincoln Navigator slammed shut, sealing them inside a soundproof vault of leather and tinted glass. The storm raged outside, but inside the SUV, the silence was deafening. Dominic didn't let go of Emma. He pulled her onto his lap, his massive arms wrapping around her trembling frame, burying his face in the crook of her wet neck. He was breathing in her scent, vanilla rain, and fear, as if verifying she was flesh and bone, not another phantom manufactured by his broken mind. "Dominic." Emma sobbed her hands, gripping the lapels of his soaked dress shirt. "You have to listen to me. He's going to kill us, if he knows you found me. Quiet, Dominic commanded softly, his voice thick with an emotion he had buried for 7 months. He signaled his driver, a silent mountain of a man named Rocco, to the airstrip. Now, the SUV peeled out of the alley, tires hissing against the slick pavement. Dominic finally pulled back his dark eyes, scanning every inch of her face before dropping to her swollen stomach. His hand rested there again, feeling a sharp, distinct kick against his palm, a muscle feathered in his tight jaw. "You let me mourn you," he rasped, the betrayal bleeding through his hardened exterior. I stood at Navy Pier and looked at a car soaked in blood. I tore Chicago apart, looking for your ghost. Why Emma? Why Lorenzo Falcone? I never spoke to Lorenzo Falcone in my life. Emma cried out, the frustration and terror finally boiling over. The money the wire transfers, the photos at the cafe, it was all staged. Deep fakes, doctored ledgers. He orchestrated all of it to frame me, to make sure you wouldn't come looking for me when he finally disposed of my body. Dominic's eyes narrowed into lethal slits. Who? Matteo. Emma breathed the name, tasting like ash in her mouth. The temperature in the car seemed to plummet 20 degrees. Dominic physically stiffened his grip on her arms, tightening. Matteo took a bullet in the chest for me. 10 years ago, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly register. He is my underboss, my brother. Choose your next words very carefully, Emma. He was skimming from the cartel shipments. Emma pushed back, refusing to back down her maternal instincts, fueling her courage. I went to your office to tell you I was pregnant. I heard him on the phone, orchestrating a weapons drop off the books. He caught me. He told me he planted the seeds of my treason. He told me. Emma choked on a sob, her hands protectively covering her belly. He said he would kill me and carve our baby out of my stomach. He sent his men to run me off the road. I had to cut my own arm to leave blood in the car so they'd stop hunting me. I had to run Dominic, to protect your child. Dominic stared at her, the silence stretching into an unbearable eternity. His mind, trained to calculate and dissect, raced through the events of the past 7 months. Matteo had been the one to find the ring. Matteo had brought him the photos. Matteo had led the charge against the Falcons, using their war to consolidate his own power within the Rossi syndicate, while Dominic was blinded by grief. Dominic reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek satellite phone. He dialed a scrambled number. Leo. Boss, the cyber chief answered on the first ring. The offshore shell corporation that received the $2 million from Emma's account. Dominic barked. I want you to trace the originating IP address of the account creation. Bypass the VPNs. Dig into the physical hardware registry. I don't care how many firewalls you have to burn through. Call me back. He hung up, tossing the phone onto the leather seat. He looked back at Emma, his expression unreadable. But before he could speak, Emma gasped. Her hands flew to her lower abdomen, her face draining of all color. Emma. Dominic's cold facade shattered instantly. What is it? It hurts. She whimpered, curling inward as a severe cramp seized her muscles. The stress, the terror, and the freezing rain were taking their toll on her fragile, iron-deficient system. Dominic, the baby. Something's wrong. Rocco, step on it, Dominic roared, pulling Emma tight against his chest. You're okay, Mia. Loose my light. You hear me? I've got you. I'm not letting anything happen to you. 20 minutes later, they were in the air. Dominic's private Gulfstream G650 tore through the storm, heading straight for his heavily fortified estate in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Aboard the jet, a private medical team kept on retainer for syndicate emergencies, immediately hooked Emma up to monitors, and began the IV iron infusion she desperately needed. Dominic sat by her bed in the jet's private cabin, refusing to let go of her hand. His knuckles were white. The ruthless Mafia-Boss, the man who had executed rivals without blinking, looked entirely undone by the sight of his wife hooked up to machines. The satellite phone buzzed. Dominic picked it up, keeping his eyes on Emma's pale face. Speak. Boss? Leo's voice trembled with a mixture of fear and awe over the line. You were right. The IP address routed through 3 proxy servers in Russia. but the MAC address of the physical laptop belongs to a device purchased by a dummy corporation, owned by Matteo's cousin Polly. Furthermore, I found hidden encrypted files on Polly's server, voice prints. Matteo used AI to synthesize Emma's voice for the cartel calls. It was a complete setup. Dominic closed his eyes. A tear, a single rare tear of profound guilt and immense rage slipped down his cheek. He had hunted the wrong men. He had let his wife live in terror, flipping burgers in a humid diner, thinking her husband would murder her. "Scrub the logs, Leo," Dominic whispered, his voice vibrating with a demonic calm. "Tell no one I called. I will be in Chicago by dawn." He hung up the phone and pressed Emma's knuckles to his lips. "He will pay," Dominic vowed into the quiet cabin, his eyes burning with the fires of hell. "I will bring you his head on a silver platter." The Rossi Syndicate's boardroom sat on the 60th floor of a glass and steel skyscraper overlooking the Chicago River. The sun had barely risen, casting long, bloody streaks of orange across the city skyline. Matteo sat at the head of the long mahogany table, sipping an espresso. Around him sat 4 of the family's top capos. "Dominic has been erratic," Matteo was saying, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "Since Emma's betrayal, he's losing his grip. The Colombians are getting restless. We need stability. I am proposing we temporarily transition the leadership." The heavy double doors swung open, shattering the quiet murmurs of the room. Dominic walked in. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, but there was nothing civilized about the aura radiating from him. He looked like the angel of death. Behind him stood Rocco and 5 heavily armed syndicate enforcers. The capos immediately stood up, out of respect. Matteo froze his espresso cup, halting halfway to his mouth. "Dominic!" Matteo forced a smile, standing up. "We didn't expect you back from wherever you disappeared to." "Sit down," Dominic commanded. It wasn't a request. The capos dropped into their leather chairs. Matteo remained standing for a fraction of a second, before slowly lowering himself. Dominic walked to the head of the table. He didn't yell. He didn't draw his weapon. He simply tossed a thick manila folder onto the polished mahogany. It slid and stopped perfectly in front of Matteo. "Open it," Dominic said softly. Matteo's arrogant smile faltered. He opened the folder. Inside were the IP traces, the banking logs tying his cousin to the dummy corporations, and a transcript of the encrypted audio files Leo had decrypted. Matteo's face went completely ashen. "You thought I was blinded by a broken heart." Dominic began pacing slowly behind Matteo's chair, like a panther stalking a crippled deer. "You thought you could use my love for my wife as a weapon to blindside me. You ordered a hit on a pregnant woman, Matteo. You threatened to carve my heir from her body." The capos around the table gasped, shifting uncomfortably their hands, dropping beneath the table to their weapons. Threatening a boss's wife was an unforgivable violation of omerta. Threatening his unborn child was an automatic death sentence. Matteo realized the room had turned against him. He lunged his hand, darting into his jacket for his firearm, but he was painfully slow compared to the beast he had awakened. Before Matteo's gun could clear its holster, Dominic grabbed Matteo by the back of the neck, slamming his face brutally into the mahogany table. The sickening crack of bone echoed through the room. Matteo screamed, blood pouring from his shattered nose. Dominic drew his custom 1911 pistol, pressing the cold steel barrel directly against the back of Matteo's skull. "Dominic, wait!" Matteo gurgled, choking on his own blood. "I did it for the family. She made you soft. You stopped expanding. You stopped killing. I was taking back our power." "You took my peace," Dominic whispered, pulling the hammer back with a sharp click. "Now I take your life." The gunshot rang out, deafening in the enclosed glass room. Matteo's body went limp. Dominic holstered his weapon, his expression entirely devoid of remorse. He looked at the stunned capos. "Clean this up and send a message to the cartel. The Rossi family is under new management mine. Any man who questions my authority will join Matteo in the river." Without waiting for a response, Dominic turned and walked out. He had a promise to keep. 2 months later, the sprawling lakeside estate in Lake Geneva was bathed in the warm golden light of early autumn. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of crimson and gold, reflecting off the mirror-like surface of the water. Inside the master suite, the air was filled with a sound sweeter than any symphony, the soft, rhythmic breathing of a newborn. Emma lay back against the plush white pillows, her hair damp with sweat, but her face glowing with absolute triumphant joy. Wrapped in a pale blue cashmere blanket in her arms was a tiny sleeping infant with a head full of thick, dark hair. Dominic sat on the edge of the mattress, stripped of his suit jacket and tie, the sleeves of his white shirt, rolled up to reveal the dark ink of his syndicate tattoos. But his hands, the same hands that had ruthlessly dismantled empires, were impossibly gentle as he reached out, letting his newborn son wrap a tiny fist around his massive index finger. Leonardo, Dominic murmured, testing the name on his tongue. They had named him after the young cyber chief who had saved their family. Leo. He has your eyes, Emma whispered, leaning her head against Dominic's shoulder. Dominic turned his head, kissing her temple, breathing in the scent of vanilla and baby powder. The darkness that had consumed him for nearly a year had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming protective warmth. He looked at his beautiful, resilient wife, marveling at the strength it took for her to survive, to protect their son against all odds. I am so sorry, Emma, Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion, his forehead resting against hers. I should have known. I should have protected you. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Emma reached up her soft hand, cupping his rough jaw. She looked into his dark, devoted eyes. You found us, Dominic. That's all that matters now. We're safe. Dominic looked down at his sleeping son, then back to the woman who owned his soul. The ruthless Mafia-Boss, the king of the Chicago underworld, knew that his greatest treasure wasn't power or money. It was right here in his arms. He leaned in, capturing her lips in a deep, desperate kiss that sealed their fractured past and promised an unbreakable future. Pulling back slightly, he brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. I promised you, in that alley, mere loche, Dominic whispered, his voice a fierce, eternal vow. I will never, ever let you go again. Did you love this intense, heart-stopping story of ultimate betrayal, undying loyalty, and a ruthless mafia boss who would burn the entire world to the ground to protect his family? If Dominic and Emma's dramatic journey kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this video with your fellow romance drama lovers. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling real-life mafia romance stories. Leave a comment below with your favorite twist.